Welcome to Piano Inspires podcast, celebrating pianists, teachers, and innovators as they share their inspiring stories about the transformative power of music.
Are you a teacher or parent looking for a fun and educational way to inspire kids through music? Introducing Piano Inspires Kids, the ultimate resource for young pianists. Each quarterly issue will inspire students to discover composers and music from around the world, explore creative activities, and play new music written by today's leading composers. Piano Inspires Kids will also connect young pianists to a broader community of inspired music makers through the many opportunities to share and submit their own content. From practice tips and technique guides to interviews with young pianists and composers, Piano Inspires Kids offers something for every young musician eager to explore the world of piano. Subscribe today at kids.pianoinspires.com using code PODCAST15 at checkout for a subscription less than $2.50 a month billed annually.
Welcome to Piano Inspires podcast. I'm Jennifer Snow. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of the Francis Clark Center. Today, I'm joined by Peter Jutras. Pete was the editor-in-chief of Clavier Companion from 2007 to 2017, which is now our piano magazine. Dr. Jutras has published articles and research extensively in many publications and done very exciting and groundbreaking research. He is a frequent presenter at conferences across the country and around the world and gives guest master classes and speeches and talks to universities across the U.S. and abroad. A nationally certified teacher of music, Pete holds a Bachelor of Music degree in Music Education from the Eastman School of Music, a master's degree in Piano Performance and Pedagogy from SMU, and a PhD in Music Education with an emphasis in piano pedagogy from the University of North Texas. His pedagogical training includes work with Tony Caramia, Samuel Holland, and Fred Kern. Dr. Jutras was named a University Service Learning Fellow for 2014-2015, and it is my absolute joy to welcome you, Pete, and share our story today on Piano Inspires podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we love to start from the very beginning.
Okay.
So what are your earliest memories of music, and how did you get started in piano?
So my earliest memories of music, I'm guessing I was 5 years old or so. My mom was a somewhat proficient amateur pianist, and she tried to give me some beginning lessons from John Sham. So I remember doing Sammy Sea Lion and Little C. And like a lot of parent-student teaching relationships, that didn't go terribly well. Something we hear about a lot from the parents of our students. So from there, we found a teacher in town, and I started to take regular lessons with a teacher in town.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up in a town called Johnstown, New York, which is in upstate New York. It's kind of near the southern Adirondacks, close to Albany. Saratoga would be the biggest major cities.
And if I asked your mom about that transition from working with her at the beginning and moving you to a teacher in town, how might you describe that?
It's a great question. I don't know that I've ever actually talked to her much about that. I mean, I don't think it was a problem or anything. I think we just realized it was probably best if I try to work with a teacher.
And what was that like for you, moving to that professional teacher in town?
I know I worked with that first teacher for maybe 3 or 4 years, and then I moved to a different teacher who was probably a little more advanced, and worked with that teacher through the rest of my high school years.
And when you were growing up, did you participate also in school music? Was there music in the community? Did you play other instruments? Was piano kind of your only instrument?
No, I started playing trumpet in 4th grade when you had the option to join band, and I played that all through high school. And that was actually a pretty important part of my musical life too. So I did, competitions and had solos and things like that. Johnstown was a pretty small town, so in my senior year, I was drafted to play French horn because there was nobody to play French horn. And apparently I was one of the better trumpet players, so they said, okay, you're going to play French horn all year. So I did that, and everything was a solo. But yeah, playing wind instruments and doing band was part of it. So when I actually went and did my music ed degree, I was hard for people to understand because I was a pianist, but I wanted to do instrumental and band music ed, not choral.
Now, those early teachers that you had in piano, what were some of the qualities about those teachers that you think sort of helped you get to the point where you went into music school? Because we often talk about the majority of our students, we're working with them to be better citizens. And it's that sort of the outliers that go on into music.
Yeah. So the teacher I had for most of my childhood was a church musician. She was a really good organist and pianist. She had been trained at Westminster Choir College. And I think she was really good at, giving me a good basic foundation through Bach inventions and Clementi sonatinas and, pieces like that. When I was in high school, she recommended that I try the piano camp at Westminster Choir College, which was about a 4-hour drive away. And so I went to that, I think the summer after my sophomore year. And Ingrid Clarefield was running that piano camp.
Wow.
So I worked with her, and that was a real eye-opening experience for me because I thought I was a big fish in a small pond. I wasn't really, but I like to tell the story, and I do sometimes in my presentations. I was kind of the star of the piano studio playing Debussy First Arabesque. And this was a small town, so I didn't know any better. I thought I was a big deal. And then I went to Ingrid's piano camp and realized, no, I wasn't such a big deal. Like, there were people playing Liszt and, much bigger pieces like that. But I think that helped light a fire under me and was inspiring and kind of opened my eyes to what I would have to do if I did want to major in music in college. And, I would have to go above and beyond. And I credit Ingrid with being very honest. And this is in no way a criticism of the teacher I had in Johnstown because she was wonderful. But I went back to piano camp the following year. So at my second summer, Ingrid kind of pulled me aside and she said, I think you need to go find another teacher to prepare you for college. And so we ended up driving an hour to SUNY Albany and working with a teacher there my senior year to get my auditions ready. I think if Ingrid had not recommended that, I wouldn't have been a music major. I certainly wouldn't have gone to Eastman. So I give her a lot of credit for seeing that and being honest and saying, you just need to expand a little bit more and get someone who's going to push you harder.
So we meet the right person at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
That changes our entire trajectory.
Yeah. And the connections in our world are incredible. And, there's another one I'll mention probably as we go through this story, but Ingrid is a big part of that.
And just when you look at your entire career to date, how connected you are to organizations that are based in Princeton,
Mm-hmm.
to the connection with the center and with Ingrid and with Westminster Choir College, and how at a very formative age, you probably don't even realize at that moment that your whole life is going to be intertwined.
Right. No, I had
all
no
the
idea.
people there
Yeah.
in that part of the world.
Yeah.
That is magical.
Yeah.
Absolutely magical. What are some of the qualities that you had in your home with your parents? What are the qualities that gave you that fire? So when you met Ingrid and she sort of said, okay, you're going to have to, your ears opened up and your mind opened up to what you needed to do. For a lot of young people, that would have been, okay, well, this has been great, but I think there's a different path for me. What kept you on the music path at that point?
That's a great question. So the whole time I was growing up, my parents owned a hardware store. They were small business people. And they bought that store when I was 4 years old. And when they bought it, the store had nothing in it. Like it had been run into the ground by someone. They were the only two employees for, I think, 4 or 5 years in that store. Like they couldn't even take bathroom breaks, let alone lunch breaks.
Wow.
Um, and to make a long story short, when they were done with that phase of their lives, they had built a second store and they had 40 full-time employees. So they built it from nothing to that, and they worked incredibly hard. And I think that work ethic and that persistence was always evident to me. That, you know, like if you want to succeed at something, you put in the effort. Like you do what needs to be done. I say this all, you know, looking back on it, you know, decades later. I'm not sure I had these thoughts when I was 10 or 12, but I'm sure that was an influence on me. And, you know, I think when I wanted to play a piece well, I just knew that I had to work hard at it.
And you took the challenge because that was the culture of your home.
Yeah.
You're faced with challenge and you go towards the challenge.
Yeah.
And you work really hard.
Yeah.
Hardware stores are interesting places.
They are.
They're community hubs. And so your parents built a business, but they also were helping other people build things.
Yes.
So there's a metaphor there for community.
Yeah.
And especially in a smaller town, was probably the hardware store in town. And was that also part of the atmosphere of growing up with your parents running their own business, a hardware store that connected? Everybody goes into a hardware store.
Yep. Yeah, they got to know everyone in this town. This is a town of about 10,000 people, so not a tiny town, but not that big either. I was at the store all the time. I mean, I grew up there. I worked there. So I got to know people there as well. Yeah.
That's a theme we're going to come back to in this conversation about building.
Yeah.
About creating community and building, which is something that you've done a lot of in your career and continue to do. Let's move to Pete, that's now gone and studied hard and is about to do the audition circuit. And did you just focus specifically on Eastman, or were there other schools you were looking at, or is that your dream school?
No, I auditioned at some other schools, and actually it's not really part of my resume or my record, but out of high school, I actually went to Syracuse University first. And I was accepted at Eastman, but decided to go to Syracuse instead to study with a specific teacher who was very active in recruiting me and a very well-known teacher, and that it seemed like a good fit at the time because I could still do kind of some bigger campus things that I couldn't do at Eastman. So I remember auditioning out of high school for Syracuse and Eastman and Ithaca and SUNY Potsdam and SUNY Fredonia, kind of the New York State music schools. Ended up going to Syracuse for 2 years. After my freshman year, that teacher that I went to study with retired and left. And there was another teacher there, Steve Heyman, who was wonderful, who I worked with my sophomore year. But at the time, he didn't have stability in that job. He didn't know if he was going to stay. He was kind of on a temporary appointment. So I decided to apply to Eastman again and think about transferring there. And I did that.
Were your parents supportive of your choice to go into music? Did they counsel you at any point? Was that just a joyous thing for them that you were pursuing music? Do you have siblings? Are you the only child?
I am an only child, so I don't have siblings. They were supportive, yes. And I give them a lot of credit for that, because when you grow up in a family business, I think there is sometimes an expectation that you're going to keep the family business going. And I don't think I would have been unhappy doing that, but I also knew that I wanted to go into music, and they did not stand in my way. They were very supportive of me, and kind of let me carve my own path.
I often say we don't choose music; music chooses us.
Yeah.
And again, I bring up that idea that building community, building a business, those are things that also translate into a lot of your leadership roles in the work that you're doing today. What were some of the influences and life-changing experiences, big change to go to Eastman?
It was. And that's where I met Tony Caramia. And it's interesting how things work out, because if I had gone straight out of high school, I wouldn't have studied with Tony. So Tony joined the faculty while I was at Syracuse. So in transferring, I ended up with him. And when I was at Eastman, when I first got to Eastman, I was pretty convinced I would be a public school music teacher. I'd be a band director, that I would enjoy that. Teaching was always something I was really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So even in high school, I taught swim lessons and I taught a couple piano lessons, like to kids down the street. And I just enjoyed teaching. Like I knew that was a part of who I was. But it was really Tony who opened my eyes to the world of piano pedagogy, which I didn't know existed. Like, you don't really know that's a thing when you are a freshman going into college. Like, you think music education, be a public school teacher, but that's the connection I said earlier that I wanted to come back to. So Tony clues me into the whole world of Francis and Louise and people like Sam Holland. And, Tony was very helpful and influential in choosing a graduate school. And that was where I really got to know people in the piano pedagogy community, that kind of audition circuit for my master's degree.
So I'm now connecting the roots of your music tree.
Right.
Ingrid at that formative junction in your life. Tony, that meeting of Tony at that point where you're really starting to sort out, am I going to be going into the public school system? Which direction do I want to take? And you encounter sort of the power of Francis and Louise and Tony and all that incredible new school energy.
Right.
That critical moment. So now you're at another junction.
Yes.
I should say joints, because you ran a hardware store. So it's like piping. We're going to fit the pipes together. Yeah. And at that point, where did you left Eastman? Now you're on fire about piano pedagogy.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I auditioned at several big programs, and it really came down to either going to SMU to study with Sam or going to Westminster. And that was a really difficult decision. In the end, I felt like SMU was a good fit. It appeared that maybe if I had gone to Westminster at that time, I would have gotten to meet Frances and know her, but I may not have worked with her a lot, because this was kind of at the very tail end of the teaching she was doing. And Sam being Frances's student on many different levels and having that connection, I kind of thought, well, maybe I'll go to SMU and work with him. And I kind of wish I could have done both, but I'm glad that I went to SMU and worked with Sam, because of course I got to know Louise very well through that relationship.
Yes. And what a powerful joint in your piping that is, when you think about it, because now you're going to really, Sam is part of the original source.
Right.
He's beyond a student of Francis and Louise. As he said, at 14, he put the curtains up in the new school.
Right.
And so now you're going directly to the source to work with one of the most influential people in our field. And at that time, Sam probably would have been relatively new at SMU. So again, isn't that interesting? You encountered Tony fresh from the new school, fresh at Eastman. So he's full of that, new energy of coming to an institution and mentoring. And now you're at SMU and you meet Sam. So you're meeting people that also changes in their lives.
Yeah. And I hope Sam wouldn't mind me saying this. Obviously, it's going to date both of us, but that's the way it is. It's probably 10 or 15 years after leaving Sam and going into academia myself that I started to realize, and memories started to come back, that, Sam was an assistant professor when I started working with him. And I was a student when he was going through the promotion and tenure process. And when you're a student, you see your faculty as you don't see them as young, you don't see them as early career. You see them as faculty, like they're up here and I'm a student down here. But now looking back, I realized that was fairly early in Sam's career.
And what were some of the experiences you had at SMU, especially with Sam and his mentorship, that brought you into sort of really expanding yourself beyond, I'm a pianist, now I'm thinking about piano pedagogy? Is that where you started developing interests in research and potentially pursuing higher education? Or is that where your mind started moving in that direction? What were some of the things you worked on with him
Yeah.
or were exposed to through him?
So there was a lot. I mean, obviously there was brilliant pedagogy and just so much to soak up there. But one of the things that was so great about that program was we had to teach a lot. Like, we were given a lot of students and a lot of hours, private lessons, group classes, and just kind of thrown right into the deep end. But, all of a sudden I had, I don't know, 12 or 14 students and 3 group classes to manage and 2 collegiate class piano things to teach during the day. All the planning, and we were made to do meticulous planning for everything, which is great. It seemed like a ton of work at the time. We didn't sleep. But that really helped me cut my teeth pedagogically, because I had students of all levels, and I had advanced students, beginning students, students that had challenges that had to be figured out and worked around, and things like that. So that was very formative. When I talk about how I got into teaching adults, if I'm really honest, that was just one of those things that happened. So in the midst of all this, you're trying to make ends meet, and that's not always easy as a graduate student. So I remember very distinctly, one of the teachers in SMU piano prep department asking me if I taught adult students. I'd never taught an adult student in my life, but fortunately, the back of my brain, that inner voice said, "Well,
Say yes.
You need students, so yep, say sure, I'll teach an adult student." And I took my first adult student and actually really enjoyed it and started taking more of them. And it was really compelling working with adult students, and it still is to me, in part because of the intrinsic motivation that they have. I mean, they have made this active and often courageous decision to say, I'm a busy person, I'm a successful person, but I'm going to spend time on trying to learn how to play the piano. Like, this is something I want to do. And that's just so inspiring as a teacher to see that motivation and to try to help that. So I finished the master's degree, and I'm starting to piece together a studio, but that you can't find 40 students overnight to make a living. And so one of the things that came to me, and I'm not sure how it came to me, but through the group piano training that I had as part of that master's degree, I thought, well, what if SMU offered some group piano classes for adult beginners? Could that work? And so I went to the community division and kind of made a proposal, and we put that together, and they ended up being pretty successful. So, maybe it took a year or two to fully spin up, but there was a time when I was teaching 6 to 8 group adult piano classes a week of different populations, with 8 or 10 people in each class. And we would have several at the beginning level, but some of them would want to continue. So we ended up kind of making more levels. Okay, there's beginning 2, and there's beginning 3, and there's intermediate, and
right.
Building. Yeah.
Building.
And that experience, literally working with hundreds of adult students over a few years, led to the questions that kind of fueled my research about what are the benefits of adult piano study? Why are all these really successful people choosing to spend time and energy on piano study? Because they're not making careers out of it. They're not making money from it. So what is it that is driving them?
Right. Love of music, love of the instrument, desire.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the research that I've done also shows that there are some deep-rooted psychological and personal benefits that they get out of it. Like, one of the most frequently cited things with all the adults I've looked at in my research is this concept or construct of a dream fulfilled. Like,
I dream to do
I've
this.
always wanted to do this. I've been
Right.
waiting my whole life to do this. For 30 years, I've wanted to try the piano or something. Or it could be even kind of a dream extended. Like I took piano for a couple years as a kid, but quit. And I've always wanted to go back to it,
Right.
and sometimes that dream is connected with, you talk about building or community, it's often connected with a family member or some event. My great aunt gave me a piano 30 years ago and I've always wanted to learn how to play it.
Mhm.
Or, I know my grandmother played piano, but I never knew her and I always wanted to make that connection. Like there's so many stories like that.
There really are.
Yeah.
They're incredible. Can I sort of delve into something you touched on, which
Sure.
was the rigor that you experienced at SMU in your teacher education and the experiential aspects of that?
Yeah.
And that's sort of developing the art and craft of teaching. What aspects of that do you think have influenced you as a teacher educator? And what aspects of that do you really feel were profound for you, that really helped you begin to understand who you are as a leading educator?
So, I think what you said about the experiential aspect, that has a big influence on me as a pedagogy teacher. And it actually still bothers me, after teaching collegiate class piano collegiate pedagogy for 20 years or more. It still bothers me to walk in a classroom and talk about teaching. Like, I think we really learn when we're teaching.
Right.
And I tell my students, I say, this is a little like being in the classroom and talking about how to play basketball or something, like
Yeah, you have to play basketball.
we can talk about some ideas and we can talk about some history and we can talk about some of the materials, but there's no substitute for actually doing it. Like you have to get out there and do it. And, I've had this conversation countless times with new pedagogy students. They say, well, I'm not ready to start a community music school student yet. Like I'm not ready to start teaching. And I always tell them, you have to start.
Right. That's how you learn.
That's how you learn. And we all wish we could go back to our first students and apologize for some of the rookie mistakes that we made, but there's no way to learn without actually doing it.
And the full circle of assessment and reflection. I'm sure that was also a big part of the SMU
Yes.
program, because
Yeah.
having gone to Northwestern and being influenced also by Francis Clark and the New School through Elvina Pierce and Francis Larimer, very rigorous. A big component of that was observation, you observing other teachers, you
Yep.
being observed, and then the reflection and discussion around, just like we do with piano performance, how are, self-reflection, self-analysis of the work so that you can build in improvements and learn every time.
I think one of the great things about that program, and of course we all hated it at the time when we were students because it was so much work, but
Right.
in any program like that, when you have graduate students teaching the kids and there's this constant turnover in who the teacher is, so if a child stays in the program for 8 or 10 years, they're going to have 4 or 5 different teachers, right? Sam was really meticulous about record keeping so continuity could be maintained. So at the end of the year, we had to write pages and pages about what the student did that year and what we expected the student to do the following year, like a plan for the whole next year and goals for the next year's recital, so that another teacher could come in and read that material and the student wouldn't miss a beat. Had I not been forced to do that, I'm not sure I would have thought to do that then in my own studio with my own students.
Right.
And thinking about, we talk all the time about this vision of the accomplished learner. Like, I really learned the skills to sit down and look at a student and say, okay, this is where we should be in a year, and this is where we should be in 3 years and 5 years, and actually kind of put that down on paper and then say, okay, well, if this is where we want to be in 5 years, what do we need to do today? How do we work backwards from that?
It's like a strategic vision plan for each student.
It is.
It really is.
Yeah.
And then how to figure out how to get there.
And I think the other thing that's kind of neat is you I think we learned that we wrote pages and pages of stuff, which annoyed us. But then we all got to the point where we had written enough of that we could also do it internally.
Mm-hmm.
And you can start to formulate lesson plans that you've written before, and you realize you have this base of knowledge to kind of work with. So, yeah, I'm really grateful for all of that.
And Sam saw something in you.
I
We're
guess.
educators and we see, well, he saw something in you because your connection to Sam goes far beyond SMU. So you pursued your doctorate.
I did, yeah.
And
So I actually had an independent studio for a few years in between the master's and the doctorate. And that was, I did that, and I did those adult classes in the community division and made a living. Like I was teaching, kind of full time. And you asked this question a little earlier, and I never answered it. So to pull this all together, like there was a point where Sam was on leave, and they needed someone to cover the SMU pedagogy class, and he invited me to do that. And that's where I got the bug
for higher ed.
And that's what inspired me to work on the doctorate, so I would be eligible for higher ed jobs. Yeah.
You are now the director of your school. You've had a very rich career already in higher education as a professor, as a mentor, and now as a leader and administrator. Can you talk a little bit about your doctoral work, your life in higher education, and how you sort of have seen that trajectory move forward, and what were some of the key aspects of that path?
Sure. So, I feel very fortunate to, have worked with great teachers every step of the way. Like, I don't know how I got so lucky, but it just so happened, living in Dallas around SMU, the one place I could go get a doctorate without having to move was North Texas.
Mm-hmm.
A bit of a commute, but there's Fred Kern, who's just, and we miss him so much, but just a wonderfully inspiring, witty, creative, I think one of the most creative people I've ever met in my life. Along with this world-class music education and research faculty, like people who really taught me how to write and edit and do statistics and, all of those things. And that, and I'm so lucky that just happened to be where I lived, because if it was some other school that was a lesser school, I would have gone there. Right. My wife was playing full time in the Dallas Symphony, so it wasn't, that was our base. We weren't looking to just move anywhere so I could work on a degree. So to kind of speed things up, I finished the doctorate and returned back to running my private studio for a couple of years after that. And then the Georgia job came up, and I applied and won that job. And I guess I kind of saw it as a way to maybe have a little bit more influence. I enjoyed working with all my students and the classes I taught, but I thought, boy, if I could really teach teachers,
right,
then I could do even more. So that was the move to Athens, Georgia, and that's one that we don't regret. That was.
And you've had a huge impact there, not only as a professor, but now, of course, as the leader of the school.
Yeah, somehow that happened along the way. I don't think that was something I was seeking necessarily, but as I was there on the faculty, I was there about 10 years, as kind of a regular faculty member, and then the opportunity came up to be associate director for graduate studies and kind of oversee graduate curriculum and that whole process. And I did that for a few years, and then they did a search for director, and I decided to throw my hat in the ring. So
now you're running the whole hardware store.
Now, apparently, yeah, for better or for worse.
I'd love to ask you some questions about your time with the magazine.
Sure.
You were the head of the magazine at such an amazing time. A lot of change and mergers. And could you talk a little bit how you started the magazine and what that decade was like for you at the helm, where you did just incredible work as the editor-in-chief?
Sure. Um, well, I always liked to write, and and I had the opportunity to work with, like I said, amazing writers and editors at North Texas, which I think helped hone my skills. So it was an interesting time in my life because there were two searches at the same time, one for the job at Georgia and one for editor of Keyboard Companion. And I entered both searches, not expecting to win either.
And you end up with both.
And within, I think literally within 2 weeks of each other, I was offered both jobs.
Exciting year.
Yeah. And I had to figure out, well, can I do this while I'm also taking a new collegiate position?
Mm-hmm.
But I decided to give it a shot. And so at that time, it was Keyboard Companion. It had only had 2 editors, Richard Chronister and Elvina Pierce.
Illustrious.
So very,
lineage.
very big shoes to fill. And I
Mhm.
was very well aware of that and very nervous about that. Who was I to come along and fill those shoes? But, Keyboard Companion had such an amazing team of associate editors and writers, that was really the lifeblood. And, it's a who's who of piano pedagogy. And so, to step in and work right away with Bruce Burr and Craig Sale and Nancy Backus and, Michelle Conda and all. I'm going to miss some people, but, that whole team, George Litterst, all of them. You want to talk about making connections and getting to
Yes.
know more of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was a great way to get to know the world. And, then it extends beyond that because the whole impetus of their roles was to go find other people in our profession who had interesting things to say. So the magazine was literally this whole web of, all kinds of teachers with interesting ideas. And it was really fun just to kind of sit back and steer all of that and kind of watch the content come in and, find good ways to package it and present it.
Do you feel that how did the magazine inform you, like that experience of expanded community? How did that change the way you perceived what you were going to do yourself personally? All of a sudden, your exposure broadens dramatically.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure I ever thought about it quite that way. One of the principles that was always very important to me as editor was to present a real range of ideas. I never thought the magazine would be any good if it was Pete's ideas. Like that's not what a magazine should be.
Mm-hmm.
It should be the world's ideas. And so I tried very hard to, even when there were things I might have raised my eyebrows at or say, well, I wouldn't really teach it that way. I still always wanted to run that content. So, there's always value in any idea, I think. And I think the dialectic process of comparing ideas is also really valuable. So I would say, it just had a huge influence in cluing me into all the different things that were happening out there, all the different ways people were thinking and approaching teaching and studios and, new ideas, old ideas, different approaches. It was really valuable to kind of have a front row seat for all of that and, just see what the world was thinking.
And what a legacy you created also for yourself in that leadership role, because you influenced the entire field. You helped to advance and mentor a lot of people's ideas forward because you took that attitude of everybody's voice needs to be heard. We need to build community. Again, coming back to building community.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about the future.
Okay.
Just sort of in that high level as you look out, leading a major university school of music, having been so involved with the professional community, you yourself as a researcher, as a teacher, as a key influencer in our field. What are some of the most inspiring things you think are ahead for the profession?
So I think what continues to drive me and inspire me is the role that music plays in, I'm going to say, just the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
The necessity of music, I think, in everyone's life, no matter where they are. I say this idea all the time. I got it from the writer Christopher Small in a book called Musicking.
Mm-hmm.
He notes that there's no culture at any time or place in human history that didn't make music. Whether it's, some archaeological find from 4,000 years ago or, in any part of the globe, there's singing, there's dancing, there's evidence of instruments. And now it's way above what I understand. So evolutionary biology is not anything I begin to know anything about. But, there are some of these books like The Singing Neanderthals and A Million Years of Music that are actually thinking we may have made music before we spoke. That may have been our fundamental means of communication, was musical gestures, musical sounds. And then, okay, so that's kind of an abstract way of looking at it. When the world was faced with COVID and everybody was locked in 2020, I mean, what was the first thing people wanted?
Music.
They wanted the arts.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. They wanted to listen to music. They wanted to watch opera and musical theater and movies. And like, I think that says something about the importance of music. And it's frustrating because we have to spend so much time in advocacy and justification and chasing our tails about why people should support music, and when it seems like it's right there in front of us, like everybody knows that it's essential. And we always joke, well, try to imagine a world without music, try to imagine movies with no soundtrack, try to imagine, going your whole day without getting to listen to music. And it's almost like people can't, because
Right.
we don't
Like live without air.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, we look at a lot of these challenges, and I think they're challenges to maybe the way we've traditionally done things, or the way, kind of some of our structures and things that have worked well for us in the past. But what hasn't changed is the human appetite for music. So I think the question is, how do we capitalize on that?
I think that's the next podcast with you.
Maybe. I wish I had all the answers to that, but there's a lot of potential out there. If you stop almost anyone on the street and ask them if they would like to be able to play music, they're going to say yes.
I know you're doing a lot of profound work around the world. You've just returned from Africa.
Yes.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that work, and also what's the future vision for yourself?
Sure. So yeah, I guess 5 days ago we landed, flying back from Kenya, and I took a team of over 20 students and faculty from UGA. I've been there multiple times, and we've done work with a girls' school there, providing music instruction and instruments and music and materials. And also, we try to provide some remote instruction when we're not there. We only go once every 3 or 4 years. Sometimes I think, those things we're saying about the importance of music to the human condition and what it means, I think sometimes getting out of our bubble is important. I imagine a lot of people watching this podcast tend to run in circles of very accomplished musicians and very accomplished students, and everything at these highest levels of technical perfection and all of that. And that's great. Like, it's amazing, and we're lucky to have colleagues like that and live in a world like that. But you kind of get outside of that to find people that have never had any opportunity to have music instruction, and give them some instruction and see how much it means and see how inspiring it is and see how uplifting it is. So we got the chance to go to a new place on this trip. And it was only for a few hours, and I'd like to go back and work more with them. It's unfortunate, but in Nairobi, there are some of the world's largest slums and some of the worst living conditions that anyone has to endure. And inside one of those slums is a project that's been going on for, I don't know, 12 or 15 years called Ghetto Classics. And I would encourage anyone watching this to look it up. This slum is right next to one of the largest landfills you've ever seen. Completely uncovered, just a literal mountain of trash that's like 20 stories high, right outside the window of this school. And you can smell it and everything. That's the conditions these people are living in. They have 500 kids playing instruments. Mm. They have a band, they have an orchestra.
That wonderful.
And it's literally saving lives. Mm-hmm. Like, it is giving these kids something to do. Not just something to do, but something to be proud of, something to look forward to, something to inspire them.
And the beauty uplifts,
yes,
and transforms and transcends,
yes,
what they're surrounded by,
yep,
and gives them hope for a different future.
Yeah. And it was just so, I mean, it's, you know, it's heartbreaking, but it's awe-inspiring. And the teachers that have dedicated, you know, their lives to be in this place and help people, you know, in the worst of conditions through music, is really amazing. And so we worked with some of the kids and we did a little teaching, you know, for an hour or two, and then they performed some things for us in their kind of orchestra. And it's great because they played Ed Sheeran and they played Uptown Funk and they played, you know, they arrange these things for their ensemble and they play them. And it's great. You know, in the midst of all that, the culture there in Kenya is probably a little more inherently music based than we're used to. So people sing, mm-hmm. you know, that's still a part of what they do, and people dance probably more than we do in the Western world. So intonation and rhythm is very natural. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty cool to see as well, you know, to see this group of kids just playing with such natural rhythm, you know, without any counting or foot tapping, or mm-hmm. They just feel it.
Back to experience.
Yes.
Back to experiential.
Yeah. And again, that's because they probably grew up around more mm-hmm. singing and moving to music than we did.
Do you see your future being linked to more work like this?
If possible, I would like it to be, yeah. And what I'd really like to do, and I think it's something that I would invite anyone listening to try and participate in, is to help with teacher training in these places in the world. You know, because the teachers there that are working, that are doing music, and it's not just in Africa, there are many other places in the world, they don't have access to the kind of resources and training that we've had access to. You know, they don't have the degrees in music education and the colleges they can go to like we're used to. They don't have the materials. They don't have the conferences and the publications and the networks and all of that. And I think that's an opportunity. And I mean, we know that talking about another connection, you know, like Karen Zorn is doing
yes
this exact same kind of work, right? Which is amazing. But how can we, again, have an even bigger influence than just showing up and working with some students? Can we help the teachers there so they can help lots of students and, you know, just get more people making more music?
Thank you, Pete. We end this podcast with a statement that we'd like you to finish. And that is, piano inspires
everything.
Indeed. Thank you so much for this inspiring and insightful interview. It's just been really interesting to learn about how you are a builder and you've been building communities, um, building opportunities, and doing so much for the world through music. So it's an honor to know you, and
Well,
thank you for spending this time with us.
thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
It has been. Thank you. The Francis Clark Center is a not-for-profit educational organization that serves the advancement of piano teaching, learning, and performing. Divisions include Piano Magazine, Piano Inspires Kids, Journal for Piano Research, National Conference on Keyboard Pedagogy, the New School for Music Study, Piano Education Press, International Online Teacher Education, and Piano Inspires Online Community Hub. Please visit us at pianoinspires.com to learn more about our impactful work and inspiring community.